So I am recording this session. Some people like it when we do that, or some people, I can't remember if our university requires it, but all right, we're going to get started because I've got 10 o'clock and I know we like to, I like to keep on schedule. So we're going to start this morning, and today I decided to switch this around for Sandy and Sharon and Karen that have been on, and Lacey, I think you participated in some of these before, but I decided to switch around the orientation this year because I think it's almost better to have a basic foundation of understanding of what positive youth development is, and before we can move forward in what are some of those other pieces of youth develop or of 4-H responsibilities. And so today we're going to talk about two that are pretty big, I think, pretty big foundations for what we do. One of them is our ages and stages or developmental levels of young people, and then the other one is the 40 developmental assets, or using the asset approach to positive youth development. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so on this, everybody can see that, correct? Just want to make sure. Let's see, move my chat box over. Okay, so on the developmental levels, as a 4-H professional, not only are we training or are we working with kids ourselves, but we're also training our volunteers. And it's really important that our volunteers and yourself have an understanding of how kids learn and how they grow. And so you have to look at young people. They grow and learn at different stages in their life. They also, at those different chronological ages, there's really 4 areas that they kind of can grow, that they can have that progress in. One of them is physical, and one of them is social, and then emotion or intellectually, or that's also, I've heard that considered cognitive as well, and then emotional. And so, we have to remember that kids, they may grow at different levels in each of those 4 areas as well. So what we're going to do is just talk about those four levels. So the first one we're going to start off with are 6 to 8-year-olds. And so really, when we look at 6 to 8-year-olds, we need to remember that we're starting to build that relationship with those kids. It's, when you think about the developmental levels, just to kind of give you an idea too, with the physical development, that refers to the actual growth and the development of their motor skills. So we're all pretty familiar with 6 to 8-year-olds where they are physically. You can see this is, well, obviously most of you know who these pictures are, but and the one picture of all the little boys, that was actually at one of Cody's Clover Bud meetings. And so, I thought, oh gosh, that kind of fits the typical kind of that age group. But we also have to look at not only within that, we have the social development, which is really the interaction between children and their ability to function in a social setting. The example here, of the 4 boys, you've got Cody and his friend Jennings that were, a little more rambunctious probably. And then you have the 2 twins, and unfortunately I can't remember their first names. I know their last name, but I can't remember their first name. But, they just weren't they weren't used to interacting socially with people. And people that they didn't know. And then you have the emotional development, and that's how young people handle their feelings and their emotions. And then the intellectual development is how they learn, how individuals learn. So as we look at this, I want to talk about, when you're looking at early elementary age, that's at 6 to 8-year-olds, so K through 2, they're really going through some growth and development. So they're mastering their physical skills. They're getting better control of their large muscles rather than their small muscles. So this is why, you don't see a lot of this age group playing, well, it's changing a lot, but that was why, really a lot of kids didn't start playing sports until they were 7 or 8. I know that that's completely changing. Is that truly appropriate? Probably, that would be depending on the child. When you're looking at social, they're learning how to be friends, and they probably have several best friends at one time. I can remember this age with Cody, and he was, it seemed like he was, well, and even now today, but that's a whole nother story. But he has a lot of, he just had a lot of friends at that time and lots of best friends. They're becoming more aware of their peers and their opinions. They're starting to really kind of think about that, and they are still very family oriented. They still want to do lots of family things. Emotionally, they see fairness at this age as being nice to other people so that others will be nice to them. That's how they see, the fairness issues. And then they seek parental or adult approval. I always joke and say that if I didn't like what I was doing in life, I was going to go back and be a kindergarten teacher, because kindergarten teachers, you're still really cool. They want your approval. They just, you're still like a queen to them or God to them. And then they also tend to behave in ways that avoid punishment. Really at that age, they're still trying to be people pleasers. And then intellectually, they base their thinking on reality and accuracy. So that's why there's a lot of spelling tests at that age. There's a lot of, they're doing math facts at that age. Their reality, their basic knowledge, and and everything is about accuracy. You need to get it correct in order to build that foundation. Kind of like why I'm doing this, ages and stages as a foundation compared to some of the other things. I think it's really important that we have that basic understanding of how young people grow and develop. They're also learning to sort things into categories. Those of you that have raised kids or are raising kids this age, we have lots of, I can remember he had this big bucket of, I don't even know what they were. They were just little animals, and they were 5 different colors and 4 different types of animals, and we'd have to categorize them by animal, by color, and it was just, it just seemed like we spent all of our time sorting and doing those types of things. And that's where they're starting to develop that sense of cause and effect. So if I do this, this is what's going to happen. They're not proficient by any stretch, but they're getting there. So really, as we think about it as a volunteer or as a parent or as an educator or, a 4-H professional, how does that implicate what we do? And so when we really think about it, when you think about the physical aspect, crafts will be very, very messy. I wish I would, and I need to go in and find a picture of it. I have some pictures of Cody's Cloverbud program, his Cloverbud Club, where, we were doing a craft and it was just like chaos on the table. But that's very typical. Their activities need to be just that. They need to be active. You cannot sit down and expect them to listen to somebody talk for a long time. This is one of the reasons why when we talk about Cloverbuds in 4-H, we say, really Cloverbuds, when they have Cloverbuds doing the same activities as the older kids, it's really not appropriate for them because they can't sit for that long. When Cody was a Cloverbud, he was still a member of his 4-H club. He was still part of it, but we didn't go to the business meetings, and we didn't do the things where he'd have to sit and listen for a long time, because they don't. And so they need to be active. This one photo, of the boys messing around, that was actually, they had just come back. They learned about photography in their Cloverbud program. And so they had taken a little adventure around the neighborhood and walked down to the neighborhood park and taken pictures everybody brought their camera, or the Cloverbud leader had a disposable cameras for them, and they were able to go and do that walking around and really and learn about photography in an active manner. They also, you need to plan activities that they use both their small muscles and their large muscles, and then work on skills that can be completed by beginners. So, that's the other reason we want to have things that they can do. What's great, like the photography classes, or the photography program, what they did was they went out and took pictures. Now, could the kids go back and develop those pictures, go back and take those or develop the pictures? No. But then they could take them and they were able to see them on their camera. They were able to take them in and have them printed. And so it was just kind of a fun, and you can see this is where they're starting to lose teeth. This is where they're starting to really, do that. This was, Cody lost 4 teeth in 3 days. And so the tooth fairy at my house had to keep running to the store and getting cash because we kept losing teeth, but this is what they do. The group activities, small group activities are best. I think they partnered up with the photography one. I know when we've done crafts and things with that age group, it's better if they work in small groups rather than individually. They break them into groups rather than to encourage them to interact with different children, rather than having them break themselves up into groups, break them up into groups, because sometimes they're going to be drawn to those best friends, and you don't necessarily always want that. You want them to learn to work with other kids. They need a lot of praise at this age. They need to seek adult approval. This is why you're always like, oh, they're always running up and showing you when they have something half done. Oh, but you're like, great job. Let's keep it up. Let's keep going. It feels like some days that is all you do with that age group. And they need to accept the belief of and the values of their parents. So, really at this age, they're going to still, they are still going to be pretty reliant on their parents' views, and so that's part of what you have to be on the lookout for as well. Emotionally, they focus on cooperative games, and they say where every child wins. I think that I don't necessarily that every child wins, but every child is successful in what they do. But this is really where we have gotten. This is why we say at this age they are not ready for competition. And I truly believe that, and I've watched it over and over and over again, not only with my own child, but with, hundreds of other children over the years. They can win and be very good at winning, but then the next year when they don't win, they don't understand why. And they're like, but I won last year, or I won last week. Why am I not winning this week? And so that is really, that's where they don't comprehend. And it's that emotional. Find ways to have more successes than failures. We want them to be successful. One of the things that I can remember doing with the kids in one of the Cloverbud clubs, they asked me to come in and do a lesson on horses. And so, number one, to keep it active when you're trying to talk about horses, when you don't have horses, because this was a club that was in town. We didn't have access to horses, but you know what? We can still have some great lessons about how to learn about horses. So the way we learned about breeds of horses is I had a whole bunch of horse models, the little, just all the different kinds of breeds. And so we would pass those around. So they actually had something physically in their hand to touch and to feel and to look at. So that kept it active. But then to teach them like the difference between a walk and a trot and a lope, we would go outside with stick horses. That was part of the other thing. They could either bring a stick horse or we made stick horses. And we would go outside and I would teach, we would show them how to do, and they would have stick horse races. Well, it wasn't necessarily about who was going to win those stick horse races, but it was, can they understand the difference between the different gaits of a horse? But they had a great time, and, it was, everybody was successful. We didn't really make it a big competition thing, but just let them run around the yard, number one, and have fun. They also need to be available. You need to be available to discuss their fears or other issues that are important to them, no matter how small it seems like. They're still, again, they're seeking that adult approval. And intellectually, reading to a child at this age group is effective, and they really enjoy it. It's always really fun to include a story when you're doing that. So they have the We Do robotics, and one of the things that's big on is the stories, and then they build the characters. The one I remember most is the Gruffalo, and if anybody's read the Gruffalo to a child, that is just an amazing. It's a great story. It was one of our favorites at our house. But so you read them the story, and then you bring in, then they build the different, I can't even remember now, gosh, it's been so long since I've read them, but they build the characters, and then they get to program them, very simple programming, like, 6 to 8 year old level programming. Basically, they get to hit a button, and it will open the mouth, or it will, it'll take 2 steps or something. But what a great way to do that, to bring in that storytelling. Help them predict answers to their questions, help them to try to come up with solutions, but you're probably going to have to guide those. And then be flexible, provide a variety of activities. Okay, so if you have a 30-minute time frame to do a Clover Bed lesson, plan on 45 minutes worth of lessons, because if something isn't working, switch gears. And that's something that's very, it's really important, I think, to do. And then role-playing and skits are often a real positive way, and a way that they like to learn, and how they like to interact. And so I think that's really, they like to do that. They don't necessarily understand what they're doing, but they like to get up and, be goofy or whatever. And, really, regardless of their age, I think it's really important that we understand, that these experiences help them to experience that positive self-concept, to experience success in what they attempt to do, to become increasingly dependent or independent. We want them to become independent. That they need to be accepted by people of different ages, peers as well as those in authority. And they need to be able to give and receive affection and experience adventure. So this is a puzzle, and this is something, this is an activity that you could do if you're doing a training for volunteers. And part of what these orientation sessions are is I'm actually going to be sharing the PowerPoints and the handouts and such, as well as the web or the recordings. But this, so you could then turn around and teach this to adults or to your volunteers. But one of the things that you could do, this puzzle, so what they've done, there's actually 4 of these. So you'll see all 4 of them as we go along. But with these 4, you can cut them apart, and then you can mix them all up and put the adults in teams of 4 or 5 or however many you have in the class, at least pairs of 2, and then they have to try to solve their puzzle. So one person's a 6 to 8 year old. They have to look through these stages, and they have to figure out, is this for a 6 to 8 year old? And then, so then they'd have to put it all together. Pretty soon they figure out that they're color schemes, but it's really good for people to think about it. But you can see, some of the aspects of a 6 to 8 year old. They tend to generalize from their own experiences. They're more interested in the process than the product, or we should be more interested in the process than the product. Many of the things that I talked about before. And then we have 9 to 11-year-olds. And so as we move into this, their physical development is really starting to move up into the forefront. They're going to hit big growth spurts at this age. They're going to hit them at different levels. More than likely at this age group, the girls are going to hit the growth spurts more so than the boys are going to hit them. So you're going to have girls that are taller than the boys, and just physically hitting that, hitting those milestones faster. So essentially, providing active learning experiences again during this time are really helpful. Some of the things with this age group, as far as their physical, they experience a steady increase in their large muscle development, their strength, their balance, and their coordination. So this is where, like I said, a lot of kids start playing sports. Or if they had played sports before, they really start understanding and start showing some of that athletic ability. They're very active. They have lots of energy. If you've ever worked with this age group, we all know that. They're super fun sometimes and not so much others. They're different, like I said, they're different maturity rates. Girls tend to mature faster than the boys at this age, and they experience that increase in small muscle coordination. Socially, they generally see adults as authority. They're going to typically follow the rules out of respect for authority. Now, like I said, you need to remember that this is the general population of this age group. You're going to have those exceptions to the rules, but what we have to remember within 4-H is we have to develop programs that are for the general population, not for the exceptions. So when you get that phone call from a parent who says, but my 5-year-old is amazing and so mature, and just, I had one gentleman call me and wanted to get his daughter in 4-H, and he's like, she wanted to show a steer, and his comment, well, she's so amazing that people stop me at Walmart because she's just so incredible. And I'm like, well, at the time I was just kind of dumbfounded by that conversation. I was just dumbfounded by the whole conversation anyway. But by that comment, I didn't have a good comeback for it. But you think about that, and it's like, well, okay, first of all, I doubt it, but it's one of those things, and it's great. Fantastic for your child, but not every child is at that level, and our job is to provide, provide programming for all children. So they're loyal to groups, clubs, gangs. This is where, we get them into a 4-H club. They're pretty loyal to that 4-H club. I can remember sitting at 4-H club meetings, and I can still do it when I go to meetings and stuff. And you have this age group, they're the ones volunteering to do everything. It seems like, they really want to get involved. They want to do lots of different things. They enjoy code languages and passwords. You find notebooks of your kids' code language, or they start talking in code language. I can remember doing it as a child at this age. They identify with individuals of the same gender. They're really not moving into they're really, still hanging out with their own gender types. We were kind of laughing at our last year during football. We were talking to a couple of other parents of friends, and we were saying, there's some of the boys on that team that were very into girls. Oh my gosh, there was a girl around and they had to just, or I can remember taking one of the boys somewhere and he was FaceTiming with a girl the whole time. And then there were a couple of us that were like, we're really glad that Cody socially, Cody and DJ are socially not at that level yet. We are still, we're hanging around with the same sex. Now, granted, I don't know right now because he's been combing his hair a lot in the mornings. So it kind of makes me wonder, but he has not brought that to our attention at this point. But, I think about that, and Socially, there we go. That's where probably one child isn't as mature or isn't at the same level as other children. This is where you start seeing those gaps, really. They prefer to work in groups and cooperative activities still at this age, and they approach problem solving with a negotiating style, and they like to compromise with their peers. Emotionally, they are accepting of their parents and their family beliefs. They still have those beliefs. They admire they like to imitate older youth, and that's where you see, they start following around the older brothers or sisters or, cousins or whatever. They really like to do that. They're starting to develop their decision-making skills. So that's something that we can really help them with. They begin to question authority. And and I know that sounds contradictory to what I said in the socially, where they still see adults as authority, but they're starting to question that authority, especially if you get towards the upper end of that. I think about, the one thing I would never, ever, ever do is teach fourth grade. That's where you're thinking about this age group. That's where they're, starting to become kind of little turds. I think they're starting to question that authority. And so, I know but it really is where they're starting to question that. But they still see you as an authority. They're just going to test you on it. They need the approval or the involvement of a caring adult. So that's where 4-H fits in perfectly. And they find comparisons with others difficult to process. This is where you can't say, well, Johnny's, look at Johnny throw the ball. He's doing it so much better. They don't get that. You have to just work with them and figure out what they can do to improve it. Intellectually, their athletic or their academic abilities vary greatly. This is about the time they're starting to get actual letter grades instead of the whatever. I don't know what they do in Nevada and Idaho. It was like a P and IP. I don't even remember. It was like I got completely confused on their grade, on what they got in kindergarten through third grade, I think was what it was. But you can see those variations. They have an increased attention span. They can start sitting through things. They have interests that change. They change rapidly, though. They're learning to use good judgment. They're still judging ideas in absolutes, right or wrong, and they really don't like middle ground. And they're interested in collections and hobbies. We have coins. We have stamps. We had bottle caps. We had milk caps from school lunches. We had, I don't even know what all collections we had. It was crazy. Sports cards. I mean, it was just nuts how many collections he had at that time. So some of the things that are implications for this age group, for the physical aspect, we need to plan activities that allow them to move around. We need to vary those activities, not just sports or don't rely solely on sports. You need to do general physical activities as well. So not just, going out and playing whatever sport, but have them, do some other things that require physical activities. Avoid competition between genders. And that's the other piece. At this age, it really should be still boys against boys and girls against girls. Nothing worse in this age than getting beat by a girl or getting beat by a boy. I mean, that's just devastating to this age. Clarify and enforce reasonable limits. This is where you start setting those reasonable limits or setting those rules with them. Plan plenty of time for them to be individuals with individuals from their same gender. So, you might break them up into groups. And then group activities are important. Emotionally, you want to provide correction quietly. At this age group, it's not good to start yelling at somebody, but you want to, in front of everybody. But, this is the point where you can pull them aside and say, okay, that is not appropriate behavior. We need to, rethink this. Give positive feedback and look for successes. avoid generalized praise. And I saw this, I didn't think about it, but that's one of the things. They don't want you to reprimand them in front of everybody, but by gosh, they want you to individually praise them in front of everybody. And so just thinking about how you can balance some of those things. Be present at group activities, be visible, but be in the backyard. So you don't want to necessarily be involved in those activities. So when we were doing teaching the kids about the different gaits and horses and having the stick horse races, I was actually having to be out there doing the activity with them. At this age group, I can just be there and I don't need to be involved. And then you want to provide that safety net of being that adult that sets those boundaries, and you're going to maintain those boundaries. Intellectually, youth in this age bracket still enjoy the hands-on activities, and that also depends on their learning style too. But more kids tend to, they're still developing that sense of learning and how they learn best. And so they still most of them really like the hands-on activities. They help youth form groups or clubs with common interests or hobbies. They start going into their project clubs. In Clover Buds, we have them learn about a lot of experiences. That's why, with Clover Buds, we say, don't focus on one program, one project area. Don't focus on rabbits, or don't focus on, cooking or whatever. You want to really focus. You want to do different things at different times, different things every week. So they're learning about lots of different things. At this age group, they're going to start breaking up into those project areas. And then vary the activities that offer you can change things up when their interest changes. So as we look at this, these are, I have a lot of shooting sports pictures in here, but there's also back east, they have a double Dutch jump roping club that, that's what the kids are really interested in, and they go and do competitions with it. And that's what the kids were interested in. So here's the puzzle for the 9 to 11-year-olds. I'll let you kind of read some of those ideas. And this is where they start liking to have shirts. This is, club shirts, and, so they identify with that club. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about the essential elements and that sense of belonging. And then we have our 12 to 14-year-olds, and this is the age group that I'm living through right now. And so if I survive in this age group, it will be it will be a miracle. But it's, as we're really looking at this age group, this is where we can start engaging young people in their own development. We can start getting their opinions. They're considered participants at this point rather than recipients of learning. And it's really fun at this age group to really get them starting to think about those principles. They want to feel an ownership for their projects and what they're doing, and involving them in the planning process really gets that buy-in and that commitment from them. When we look at this age group, physically they exhibit a wide range of sexual maturity and growth patterns between genders and within gender groups. We have some young people, both men, both boys and girls, that are reaching sexual maturity. At my house we have voice cracking every once in a while. It's all starting to kind of happen. You can see the hair growth on them. One of Cody's really good friends has to shave his mustache already, and he's 12. And so, okay. So thanks, Karen. We're recording too, so you've got it, so you'll have it. But, it's really funny to see this. And I take Cody to school every morning. And so it's really fun to get to see him, or to see all the different kids and the sizes and my son is not the biggest kid on the face of the earth by any stretch. He still has to gain 4 pounds before he can play football this year. I mean, he'll do it, but he's pretty little, but he's got a couple friends that are even smaller than he is. And it's so funny, to see them compared to, and then he has one of his other good friends that looks like he's in high school, and just to see that variety of kids physically. Again, their changes in appearance occur at different rates, and this is where we start seeing probably more so with girls than with boys. Girls are starting to mature, and, some girls are jealous that other girls have body parts that they think they should have, and boys are paying attention to them because of that, etc. So it's just things that we need to, and it's always good to, this is where it's good to start having some of those body image type conversations with kids, and I think we do have there's some good materials out there from 4-H that talk about that. If you notice that you're having some issues with that, I think it's good to have those conversations. Socially, they're interested in activities that are starting to involve the opposite sex. They're starting to look at their peers more than their parents. And this is where, I even think about it, kind of moves into the intellectual. If you've got a young person that's, that their friends are not getting very good grades, but they're very, very smart, you can notice a downfall in their grades, because they don't necessarily, they're looking at their peers more so than their parents, and they're really trying to see those differences. They see they see themselves as always center stage. They're very self-centered at this age, in this age group, which is okay. I mean, we just need to realize that, and how can we work with that? They're concerned about social graces, their friends are being liked, etc. They strive for independence, yet they want and need that parental approval. And so, again, that's kind of one of those confusing. And they seek privacy. I used to be able to go in when my son was taking a shower or taking a bath and put his clothes in there or drop something off. And I'm not allowed in the bathroom, period, when he is taking, and neither is his father. When he's taking when he's in the bathroom, nobody's allowed in there. And it just kind of makes me laugh. Emotionally, they're comparing themselves to others. They're concerned about their physical development. I mentioned all that before. They always see I did that one already. Sorry, that was me. That was my bad. I'm going to go to this just so you can look at that. But intellectually, they're finding justice and equality to be important issues. I love when my son comes home right now and they're having these debates in class, and they're starting to have these more conversations. One of the things they just did was a debate on violent video games and whether they should be banned or not. And what was really interesting was, obviously nobody wanted to be on the side of banning violent video games, but the teacher did force some kids to take that side of the issue, and my son was one of those. And to have him think about the other side was actually really, really good. So, it's kind of, sometimes you have to force those issues, but I think it's good. They're developing their skills in using logic. That's a big part of this age group. They can solve problems using more than one variable, and that was, part of those debates is that aspect. They're ready for in-depth, long-term experiences. They're starting to have some more of those. And then they want to explore the world beyond their community. This is where they start getting interested in traveling to other places. I know, I don't know about the rest of you, but some of the schools, even at this age group, like to take kids on trips. This summer, the school Cody goes to is actually taking a group of young people to Europe to learn about World War II. And then they're also taking a group to Washington, D.C. for spring break. We weren't able to swing either one of those trips. Neither one of them worked for us. And so Cody, we talked about it, and what we're doing this year is instead I'm taking him to Leadership Washington Focus through 4-H. And so It's always, looking at that. They like to, that's where a lot of churches start going on mission trips to other countries. We have a good friend that's going down to Central America. One of Cody's good friends is going down to Central America during spring break on a mission trip with his church. So you can see some of those trends. I think that's why they started doing some of the LWFs and some of the trips for not quite young, for about this age group. They are, they want, the implications for this, they're the physical, you need to provide honest information when they ask those sexual questions. Now, in 4-H, we do, that's parents especially. With 4-H, we need to make sure that our that we have some of those parental approvals, because we know that not everybody thinks alike. And so we need to, you need to kind of gauge what you think you can say to your young people and what you can't. You need to provide activities that aren't weighted towards physical powers. So you need to have activities that bring the other three, bring that social, bring that emotional and that intellectual into it, not just physical. You need to be patient with their grooming behaviors. The other morning I just kind of chuckled because I had a hairbrush and a bottle of spray gel in my car because, we weren't done with our hair yet. And this is mind you, a 13-year-old boy, but we weren't done with our hair yet before we had to leave for school. So he just brought it with him to make sure his hair looked good when he went to school. I mean, this is a kid that, I typically I'd say, when was the last time you took a shower? And now he's starting to move into that grooming phase. He wants to take a shower and he wants to make sure his hair looks good. You need to provide activities to be with the opposite sex in healthy ways, where they're planning groups, or they're having parties, or they're doing fundraising. You want it to be fun and not stressful. You want to encourage involvement in teen councils and planning boards. You're looking at 12 to 14. So this is really where you can start getting them involved. If you notice this last weekend with the civility workshop, it was for 13 and over. We didn't include the 12-year-olds because we thought, again, you're looking at the spectrum. And 12-year-olds tend to be more on the lower spectrum. But we thought at that 13-year-old level, they're starting to develop some of those skills, and we're trying to develop those skills in them. So it's one of the reasons why we decided to include them. You want to provide, find time to talk with them individually, to help them work through their problems or discuss issues. Don't do it in front of a whole group, but maybe it's a time you can do it individually. Emotionally, you want to plan activities that don't compare one youth to another. You avoid singling them out in front of others. And then you want to provide opportunities to learn skills. Intellectually, you want to provide opportunities to ask questions, and question ways of doing things. So, this is a great, you think about robotics. This is a way that kids start thinking about, how can we build this robot differently? Or how can we do this differently? Our big thing in our house right now is, so Nerf guns that are developed by the factory are not good enough anymore. We have to take apart all of our Nerf guns and modify them, or, I can't remember what he calls it, but he basically modifies them to make them go faster and harder, because Nerf darts don't hurt bad enough. But, he has to figure out a new way to do things. And so in his brain, that's how do I recreate this Nerf gun to make it better? You want to plan activities that require some length of time to complete. They have an attention span, and so you want them to build that. Ask questions to encourage them in their predicting and problem solving skills. And you want to be there to serve as assistants, but don't do it for them. And also, think about more complex games. I was laughing because we were playing, I think it was Trouble over Christmas, or yeah, it was over Christmas when my parents were in town. We played Monopoly, and then we played a lot of board games, which, doesn't happen very often. How many times do kids play board games? But it was really fun. But you could see, and even myself, I do have to say, with Monopoly, it takes a long time, and it's a more complex game. And Cody's starting to understand what Monopoly is now, and Trouble. It was like we played 2 rounds, and all of us were like, oh my gosh, this is like so boring. And so you have to, think about, those types of things. When you're looking at this age group, I think one of our key pieces too is to have open communication with them. We talk about, you talk about having dinner at the, sitting down at the dinner table and having dinner. I personally think that is so important. Not that we do that per se around the dinner table, but we will sit and we always eat dinner together, because I know when I was growing up, the dinner table was where anything could be asked. There was no judgments. There was no, you were allowed to say anything you wanted to say. And so we had some great conversations at the dinner table, but and you have to do that. You can't, someone can't get in trouble for saying something inappropriate, because that's just, that's where it was allowed. And so I think, having that open communication. And you've been able to see this, this puzzle. Most of the stuff I've talked about is on there. And our last age group is our 15 to 18-year-olds. So looking at this age group, you've got a lot of variety, probably not as much. I think that 12 to 14-year-old age group, you've got a lot bigger gaps. Starts to kind of shore up. This is where you're going to see your boys start maturing, start growing. They're going to be catching up and becoming physically bigger than the girls in many cases. Physically, they're very concerned about body image. They exhibit a small range in sizes and maturity. By this point, almost everybody, both boys and girls, have reached sexual maturity. So, you're going to see that starting to get smaller. They tend to have realistic views of limits that their body can be tested. So those young people that are not, that know that they aren't good at sports are going to not be playing sports. And even if their parents are, trying to push them, they're going to say, no, I don't, a lot of times they're going to say no. Socially, they're starting to search for intimacy. This is where they tend to romanticize everything. This is where it starts getting scary when you're chaperoning this age group. This is where we, as chaperones, use tape, on the doors, or we don't get much sleep when we're around them, but they make commitments, both within relationships and also within the program. This is where they can say, oh yes, I can do that. They desire respect. They want adult leadership roles, and they can commit to follow through. I always say that with this age group, let them attempt it. Be the adult that can help them if they can't finish. If they, be checking in with them, and if you see that things are not getting done, be willing to step in, and say, do you need my help? We've got to have this done by this point. I think you can do it, but I think, I'm willing to help you. And most of the time they're going to admit, yes, they do. Or if the ball gets dropped, be there to pick it up and help them learn from what they, that's always the good learning lesson of, okay, so we didn't get it done this time. What can we do differently next time to ensure that this task gets done, or something similar gets done? Emotionally, they begin to accept and enjoy their uniqueness, but they still seek approval from their peer groups. Okay, so this is where the different groups start breaking out, the different styles, the different dress. But if you ever notice, typically you don't have one person that's completely out there by themselves. They're usually with like-minded people, and they're still seeking that approval. They may be individuals, but they're still seeking the approval of like-minded people. They look for confidence in others, of others in their decisions. They see themselves from the viewpoint of others, so they're starting to see that. They take fewer risks, and I think that's in retrospective to the risk taking. I mean, they're still taking a lot of risks at that age group. As we all know, that our 4-Hers tend to take less risks, but as a whole, there's some that they're not doing quite as much. They can initiate and carry out their own tasks without the supervision of others. I can't wait for that day of not having to stand over him when he's doing homework to make sure that it gets done. and they're starting to look at career possibilities. This is really the point when we need to be talking about career options in everything we do, in every project that we do. Even when you're looking at beef, okay, so kids are taking a beef project. So maybe one day there's a lesson on what are all the careers you can have around the beef industry. Producer, meat production. You can even talk about feed store. You could talk about, working in designing shoes. I mean, there's so many different things, and have them start thinking about all those possibilities that are related to the beef industry. And so really get them thinking about all of those. Intellectually, they're mastering abstract thinking. They can demonstrate acquired knowledge, and they can consider many perspectives on a given issue, and they lose patience with meaningless activities. And I really see that. If you've got, this is where, when am I ever going to use algebra again in my life? And so, how many of us have heard that many, many times? So some of our implications, provide experiences about body image or etiquette or grooming. I can remember being in my ag class in high school, and every year before the banquet, we always talked about what was appropriate dress for the banquet and how did we behave, and we always had an etiquette lesson. And there's nothing funnier than one of those old ag teachers giving you an etiquette lesson. So, but I think that those things are really critical to do with kids. I've done many workshops at different teen conferences or teen events where, how to do an interview and how do you address appropriately for an interview, and how do you fill out the application and those types of things. And I think that's very, very appropriate with this age group. Avoid comments that criticize or compare stature, shape, or sizes. I think that's another piece. Socially, we need to provide opportunities to explore the job market and careers. I don't know how many of you are familiar with, and I don't see anybody, Lacey's on here, but Buddy in Laughlin has got he did have a fantastic program going on about, he had different people in the community would come in and talk about what they did for a career. So he had the Metro Police, he had a lot of the chefs from the casinos, he had even the casino managers, and a variety of people coming in and talking. And then they put together a job shadowing program for those teens with those adults. And what a great program to do for a teen group. Provide opportunities for them to plan their own programs. That's a program that you could actually have them plan. Maybe, and then you're there to help guide in case they miss something, but that could be something. They could be getting a hold of those businesses and talking about what they're doing and what what their plans are and what they want to do, and scheduling those individuals. Provide opportunities to speak about their own beliefs, and I think it's really important that we allow those kids to talk about that in a non-judgmental place. And because everybody has different beliefs, and it is, and that's fine. And we need to remind all of our individuals that we should, we don't have to necessarily agree with someone else's beliefs, but we need to accept that those are their beliefs, and we can't, and we should be, like we talked about this weekend, remain civil in how to have those discussions in a civilized manner. We need emotionally, plan activities that allow teens to try different roles. One of the things that I've done with the 4-H ambassadors that I think is really good with teenagers is we're doing a shared leadership model. So what that means is we may have one person that is the president or the chair for 2 or 3 months, and then and one person is the secretary or takes the notes, and then after that time, then we shift and we move to the next individuals. It works really well because it gives everybody that opportunity to take on that leadership role. If we had somebody that was very dead set and didn't want that role, that's fine, but it gives everybody a chance to try that may not necessarily step up normally. And be willing to be wrong. We know that this age group does not put us on a pedestal, and we have to admit when we are wrong. Intellectually, we need to involve them in carrying out plans. We need to involve them in advisory groups and decision-making groups. Your leaders' councils should really have teen representatives on it. Not one, not really two. It should have, more representation. And offer those vocational and career explorations. You can see on this puzzle, a lot of the same things. And the next one is kind of an interesting mindset. So one thing that we have to remember when we're working with young people is we need to focus on the audience. So in this case, it's kids. It's really easy for us as adults, because we have a broader frame of reference of the world. It's hard for us to imagine that not everybody has that. And so these are just some really fun things to think about in the mindset of today's college freshmen. So this is put out by, I think it's Beloit College. It's Beloit College in Wisconsin. They put this out every year. They've been doing this since, I think, the 90s. I know I have a list from 96, and it makes me laugh every time. But you think about this, and, it's trying to give the faculty that understanding of what young people are. So this is the last class. The college freshmen right now are the last class of millennials that are out there. And so, we've had these long conversations, and I was thinking about that as I was putting this together, and I thought about it, and I was like, wow, this is a class of 2021. So they will graduate from college in 2021. And I thought about that, and I was like, wow. So in extension, we've had lots of, if you've gone to any workshops, I know Lacey was in Las Vegas a couple of years ago when they had a workshop at the JSEP Leadership Conference about the different generations. And big thing is the millennials. And I think about, gosh, you know what? We're now entering the next generation. Generation Z they're entering the workplace. So we've got to start figuring out how to work with that generation as well. This is the last class that was born in the 2000s or in the 1990s. Next year, the college freshmen will all have been born in the 2000s, and that's scary to me because I was well into my career in the 2000s. So this is the first class that's grown up with nothing but smartphones, and you think about that. phones have, phone has not been a phone. You very rarely talk on it. It's always been that that video game or a research library, and how crazy is that to think about? This class has always had emojis to cheer them up, and now there's thousands and thousands of emojis. They were talking about, somewhere I was reading about the emojis, and is that going to start guiding emotional intelligence in our kids? The John F. Kennedy Jr. has always been dead to them. That was one, I think about my parents' generation, and they talk about, they can remember to the day and to the minute where they were when they got the news that Kennedy had passed away. And, I think for my generation, we're going to probably be to that point of, number one, the first space shuttle blowing up, because most of us were watching it from a classroom, but also of 9/11, we can remember exactly what happened. The kids, starting next year, and even this class, they weren't old enough to remember that. And so, for them to remember those things, and I can even remember hearing about John F. Kennedy Jr. when he died, and, that's, what that means. They've grown up in a world where knowledge and opinion have been decentralized and varied. They've grown up in the world of Wikipedia. They've grown up in those. And you can see some of these other ones on here, I love the fact blackberries have gone from a wild fruit to a communication device to back to a wild fruit. Ketchup has always come in green. Do some of you are young enough that ketchup has probably always been green, but do the rest of you remember when you could buy green ketchup or purple ketchup and it was just crazy? It was no longer just red, For this age group, they've always had green ketchup. Justin Timberlake has always been a solo act. And the one I loved was Bill Clinton has always been Hillary Clinton's aging husband. I think about some of those, you can read those. It kind of makes me giggle. Some of them from earlier. And when you go onto their website, if you just type in mindset of college students, you'll go to their list, and you can actually go all the way back to the beginning. Some of the ones that I've had before is, they didn't know who Mork was or where he came from, or they've never been scared to put their feet in the ocean because of Jaws, or the remote control on the TVs. They never had to get up and turn the channel on the TV, or it's just kind of funny. And so I just kind of want to get, and I know you can only type in the chat box, but are there any of these that you guys find astonishing, or you find kind of funny, or you can relate to? I mean, I relate to all of them, but if you do, I kind of would like to, if you can type that in the chat box. I can't be quite as interactive on this as I'd like to be normally. Anybody gonna share? Okay. Well, then there's just the last part that I want to talk about with this is the things that I've learned. So these are things, let's think about a 9-year-old. Think about how you are as a 9-year-old. So I've learned that you can spread peas out on your plate to look like you ate more. That came from a 6-year-old's mind. I've learned that you should never jump out of a second-story window using a sheet as a parachute. That comes from a 10-year-old. I've learned that you shouldn't confuse a black crayon with a Tootsie Roll. A 10-year-old again. I've learned that when you have 3 of your wild friends in the car, the driver freaks out. That comes from a 9-year-old. And we have, I've learned that you can't hide a piece of broccoli in a glass of milk. I've learned that when you wave at people in the country, they stop what they're doing and wave back. I've learned that when you laugh and drink soda pop at the same time, it comes out your nose. And I've learned that goldfish don't like Jell-O. And I've learned that girls sweat just as much as boys. So, it just kind of makes you giggle, but think about that mindset and what's going through their brains. That always, when I come back to this, that is, it gets me thinking about, oh, yeah, okay. So I've been kind of crazy thinking the way I've been thinking. So any questions about that topic? Okay. I am going to, Sandy, we're good. Okay. Do they do this for those? They don't go all the way back to 1960s. Sorry, Sandy. But they do go back to the early 90s. I know. I just thought it was kind of, I think it's comical. It makes me laugh every time to think about the mindset of a young person, because it really does get you thinking differently. All right, so now I need to share my screen again. So I've got about 15, 20 minutes, and that's about all it'll take for the asset approach. Sorry, I'm gonna get my chat box back up. Every time I switch, it makes me take my chat box, or takes my chat box away. So the asset approach to positive youth development, this comes from the Search Institute. And if you have not had time, if you have not had a chance or didn't know about the Search Institute, I would highly suggest that you go on and look at, just type in Search Institute and learn about their what they kind of look at and the 40 developmental assets. It's something that we don't talk about a ton in 4-H anymore, but I think it's really, I think it's a foundation of where we're going. So what is the asset approach? So there's 40 building blocks of development. So these are things that young people need. What they say is the more assets that a young person has, the more successful they will be later in life. So they can thrive and be successful. So that's what happens when they do have the assets. Now, it's kind of like when I talked about the PRKC and the development or the competencies that 4-H professionals should have. We know that not every kid's going to have all 40 assets. If they do, they're a super child. But again, the more assets we can help them to build, the better. Okay, I'm trying to figure out where there we go. So on this, the 40 developmental assets, it's a framework that identifies kind of those crucial relationships, those experiences, the opportunities, and the qualities that children and adolescents need to grow up. How they came up with these is they did surveys of 6th to 12th graders, and this is across the country for probably 30 years. They've been doing the asset survey. They show, it consistently shows the more assets a young person experiences, the more positive choices they're gonna make, and the less risky behaviors they're gonna follow. And then on average, what they found is most young people have 18 of the 40 assets. So they're in two different categories. So there's 20 external assets and 20 internal assets. And so what I'm going to do is, so you can see, and then they're broken down into categories. So you've got support, empowerment, boundaries, and constructive use of time. So I'm going to briefly talk about these. So external, so support, things like family support. So that is, family support provides a high level of love, a love and support. And we can see that a lot of times even within our 4-H program, when we have families that are involved with the young people, again, you can see some of those higher those higher assets. Positive family communication, when your families aren't fighting or you can communicate in a positive manner, young people are more willing to go and ask their parents for advice. They seek advice and counsel from their parents. So the one that we fall into most often within the asset approach is the other adult relationships. And what they found is young people need to have a caring relationship with at least 3 additional adults that are non-parents. So that could be an aunt, it could be an aunt, an uncle, a grandma, a grandpa, friends, parents. It could be 4-H volunteers, Girl Scout leader, a coach, some kind of other caring adult. And that's what, like I said, that's where 4-H falls in most often. A caring neighborhood. This is something that, I don't see it as much. I see it probably here more so, but I can remember growing up in a neighborhood. I mean, granted, when I was growing up, probably in the square mile around my parents' house, 3/4 of that square mile was all relatives. But at one point, I could go probably a 3-mile stretch and I could tell you who lived in every single house in our neighborhood. We had a friend that lived down the road from us, and he lived next to this little park. We had a massacre happened. It was called the War Massacre, happened right down on the river, where a group of settlers were massacred. And there's a park with that commemoration. And so Ken lived right next to War Massacre Park. And it was, the big spot in high school to go make out. And I knew I could never go there, because he knew my car, or, he was kind of always watching what was happening at the park. And I could almost guarantee by the time I got home, my parents would have been called. My sister was more of the wild child than I was, but I can remember her being 16. Summer she was 16. She'd just walk in the house, hand her car keys to my dad and say, "You're going to find out anyway. Here you go. I'll get them in a week." Because the neighbors, it was just more of a neighborhood atmosphere. People were more willing to say things to neighbors, or keep an eye on kids. Now I feel like I can't even, if a kid's at my house and they're not doing something properly, I feel like I can't even hardly discipline them without getting into trouble. Now I do know those kids that I can discipline, and the parents, I always tell parents, hey, if my kid's misbehaving, you better correct it. I'm okay with that. I think it's that neighborhood approach. The caring school environment. Schools provide a caring, encouraging environment, and parental involvement in school. Parents are actively involved in helping their kids succeed in school. That's not only being at the school and helping or getting to know the teachers, that's also at home, making sure homework's done, those types of things. Empowerment, the community values youth. They perceive that adults value the youth involvement. Youth as resources, so they're given useful roles in the community. This is where teen advisory groups within communities is a fantastic idea. Youth serve community, so the service to others. This is another point where, if your 4-H clubs are not doing community service or service to community, I think it's critical that you make that a component of every 4-H club. Because they found that, when young people serve their communities 1 hour or more per week, that they do, and that doesn't necessarily have to be, going out and doing a big community service project. Maybe that's just as they're walking home, they're picking up garbage or whatever. And that sense of safety, they feel, young people feel safe at home, in their school, and in their community, in their neighborhood. Then there's also the boundaries and expectations. So families have clear expectations and rules, and there's consequences for the actions. And the same with the school and with the neighborhood. Neighbors are taking that responsibility for monitoring young people's behaviors. And that there's adult role models. Parents and other adults provide that positive, responsible behavior. Positive peer influence, the young person's friends display responsible behavior. And high expectations, that both parents and teachers and, our 4-H program, encourage young people to do well. We set the bar one step higher. Constructive use of time, they have creative activities so that they spend, they found that kids that spend 3 or more hours in lessons or practice music, theater, or some other kind of art tend to be, they have that asset. When a youth program, so a young person spends 3 or more hours per week in sports, clubs, or organizations at school. And then religious activities, that's another asset when young person spends 1 or more hours per week in activities in religious. And notice all of those are broken out. And what they really find is young people should be involved in all of those. And I know that that's tough to do sometimes, but we need to try to, see some of those. And then time at home, that young person is out with friends with nothing special to do 2 or fewer times per week. So they're not just out hanging out with friends, they're actually spending time at home with their families. So then our internal assets are, things like positive identity, social competencies, commitment to learning, and positive values. So these are things that young people need to learn to get, that are internal within themselves. So things like commitment to learning, that the young person is motivated to do well in school. School engagement, that they're actively engaged in their learning, they're actively engaged in their school. Homework, young person reports doing at least 1 hour of homework a day. And that could be reading, or that could be, actual homework. A young person cares about their school. And then reading for pleasure, that a young person reads for pleasure 3 or more times a week. Positive values, things like they place a high value on helping other people. They place a high value on promoting equity and reducing hunger and poverty. They act on convictions, and they stand up for his or her beliefs. A young person is honest, and they tell the truth even when it's not easy. That they have that responsibility. They take that personal responsibility. And then, they know that it's important not to be sexually active or use drugs or alcohol. The social competencies, they know how to plan ahead and make choices. An example, I'm going to be going to Ely this weekend, and to visit with Billy Sue and to kind of see how things are going out there. And one of the so my son has committed to playing, or to being a baseball umpire this next year, or this baseball season. And they have clinics every Friday night and Sunday. And he made the commitment, he thought ahead. It's that decision and plan, planning and decision making. He thought ahead, and he thought, I can't miss those because I need to know what I'm doing. And so he made the decision to call Grandma and say, Grandma, can you come and stay for the weekend while Mom and Dad go to Ely? But it's, again, I think that those are critical. Interpersonal competency, that they have empathy, that they show sensitivity, and they're good friends. They have cultural competency. Young person has knowledge of and comfort with people of different cultures, racial and ethnic backgrounds. This is probably something, as we're working with young people today, if you look at some of the research that's out there, they say that young people don't see color anymore. Granted, I think that depends on where you are and, all of that. But I even find it as conservative as my child is, which we don't know where he came from, but he has some very conservative views in life. But when it comes to racial diversity, or it comes to ethnic diversity and those types of things, there's nothing even, there's nothing. It's a kid is a kid, and which I think is fantastic. And people with disabilities, everything. It's just everybody's the same, and so I think that that's really critical way to raise kids. Resistance skills. Young person can resist negative peer pressure in dangerous situations, and they can resolve conflict nonviolently. And then you have that positive identity. So that personal power, they feel that they have control over things that happen to them. That their self-esteem, they have a high self-esteem, or a positive self-esteem, I would say. The sense of purpose, they know, they feel like, okay, my life has a sense of purpose. I know where I'm going. And that positive view, they're optimistic about their future. Nothing hurts me more than when a kid says, I have no idea, what my future holds. I think it's really important that we give our young people the knowledge that they can do whatever they want, and help them to work on that. Give them the skills to know that they can go to college. There are ways to go to college, even if your parents don't have the money for you to go. Whether, and it doesn't matter if it's, a community college, a trade school, whatever, that they do have a future. So that is a very, very quick approach to the asset approach. I just gave you a generalization of it. I do have, I'm going to be sharing with everybody the PowerPoints and then some handouts. And I have some really good documents that I think will benefit, or that will provide that. Because if you look at the asset approach, so they have things, when you're trying to support the assets of young people. So things like smiling is huge. Another one, learn the names of the kids. And we're going to talk about this when it comes to the essential elements as well, but it really fits in with the asset approaches as well. I had a gentleman that worked for me. He was an AmeriCorps Vista worker. This was kind of not really early in my career, but kind of early in my career. And he was from a different country, and so did not have the same understanding of youth development that I had. And I had him doing an after-school program. We had done it the year before, and super successful, just amazing program. We started it again when he came on board, and I couldn't figure out why the numbers. We started out with like 40 kids in the program, and about probably about a month or two into it, we were down to about 20. And I'll tell you, by the time it ended, we had like 5 kids left in the program. And I think those 5 kids were left because that's the only option their parents had, because it was free. It was, we provided a good, we provided a safe environment for the kids. But I went in, it was probably about a month and a half into the program, and I went in to teach a lesson because he was going to be out of town. And I found out that part of the issue was he wasn't learning the kids' names. He wasn't talking to the kids. He would just do what he needed to do and get out, and it was like, by the time I left that day, I had learned all the kids' names. I was calling them by name, and they're like, how do you, so-and-so, I don't even remember the guy's name now. He never did that. And I'm like, that's just part of what you do in, when you're looking at positive youth development, is you always make sure you get to know the kids' names, and you talk to them, you find out about them. And that's, to me, really, really critical. So that's one of the things in supporting those assets. It shows them that you care about them. When you're empowering those assets, you give them a chance to share their gifts and their talents, and if you feel that a young person isn't safe, or they don't feel safe, you don't feel like they're safe doing something, you intervene. One example of something that I've done in, so how many of you, camps or Discover Your Future. I don't know if this ever happened here. I know it happened at camps years ago. Probably still happens at some camps. But when a kid loses their name tag, or loses their folder, or loses something, okay, we all know that happens, right? They're brought up on stage, or brought up in front of everybody, and they have to sing a song or do a dance. Or the one that got me, that I finally could have put a kibosh on, is they had to write their names with their butts, Now, granted, when I was younger, I laughed my head off when one of the chaperones who happened to be a very good friend of mine. He was a neighboring ag agent, and we were about the same age, and just had a great time. He lost his name tag and had to go in front of 500 kids and write his name with his butt. Okay. That happened once I went back to Idaho and I was a state specialist, and I had said no more of that. First of all, we can't write our names with our butts because that can be construed as sexual harassment, both for the child doing it and also for the person, the audience. But even then, having kids go up and have to do something as a punishment for losing, when, again, we talked about developmentally appropriate, they don't like to be singled out. And I literally walked up and told the adult volunteer advisor, stop, absolutely no more. It was not allowed. And he kind of questioned me on it. And I'm like, don't even question me. This is absolutely no more of this. And so, yes, I was not nice, or, I was not viewed. They did not like me for a while after that, but it's like, we have to think about, again, were they safe in that environment? And I could physically see that there was kids physically uncomfortable with doing it. The thing that got me was, we don't know when a kid is on the autism spectrum. And, sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. We don't, and that could put somebody over the edge. And so we just really have to be careful about some of those things. And when we're trying to build their assets, notice when young people are doing things right, and, say something and encourage them to continue doing that. When you're looking at those boundaries, know the boundaries for your organization. I think it's really important for clubs to come in and, one of their first meetings of the year, set their boundaries, set their rules up for the year and their consequences, and have the young people be involved in those conversations. They're usually typically harsher than the adults. Enforce boundaries when you see an infraction. Here's the thing: we have to be consistent, and we have to give the same punishment to everybody if they are not following. And here's one that I really like. Instead of being harsh with a young person, redirect them to a better activity or a better way of acting. So use it as a teaching moment rather than a punishment moment. And then remember that you are the role model. Act and behave the way you expect them to behave. The constructive use of time assets. Ask people about activities that they're involved in, and other, and which ones they enjoy the most. One of the things, this is so funny. So my husband coaches football, or is going back to coaching football this year, and we have our head coach for football is a pretty crusty old man. I mean, he's like 70 some years old. He's a Vietnam War veteran, and he is a crusty guy. I mean, I love Steve to death, but he scared me the first year we played. I've now learned how to deal with him. But what I have told him is, I get the kids, I get that football team the first, half an hour or so, because they were just starting to do drills and do practice, and they never learned each other's names, and they never did some of those things that I think are really critical. And so I took them, the year I took them the second practice, and we did just around the circle what our name was, what grade we were in, and who our favorite football teams were. And then, you could then you knew something about that kid. And, I always made it a point to go up and ask them, so, how's school going? What are you doing? And I've been working on my husband to do some of those things as well. I think that those, asking them about themselves is really critical, and then getting to know the parents too. Make time that you spend with the young people meaningful. Play with them, talk to them, those types of things. Share your values of learning. Ask people about school and whether they're completing their homework. Again, that was a big thing. We had a couple of young people, a couple of boys that actually had to sit out a few games because they were not completing their homework. And not only were their parents adamant about it, but the coaches were adamant. You don't do your homework, you don't get to play. And I think that, even in 4-H, we need to kind of take that, hey, if kids aren't doing their schoolwork, they also, then they need to have some consequences. They need to understand. Attend a school function for a young person. We, such as a play performance, a game, a recital. I think that that's always this last year. So we played on a different football team. I mean, I'm just going back to something that isn't necessarily 4-H, but I think it has an impact on kids. We didn't play on the same football team, but we went to about 4 of the games from our old football team because those kids had come to mean something to us. And we wanted to, and so we wanted to show them that we supported their, how they play, their play. And so, and it did. And we've got a lot of those kids coming back that weren't going to come back because, number one, my husband's coming back to coach, and they know that, they're going to get that positive experience because we really try to do that. And then there's some other things in there that you'll see. But, those are just some things that I think are really, as we're looking at our foundation of positive youth development, those are some things that we need to keep in mind. And so, as we're moving forward, next week is our next orientation, and we're actually going to be talking about some other. We're going to be talking about targeting life skills model, which is talking about life skills, and then experiential learning. So again, I think that those are also very basic foundations of what we do in 4-H, and we need to have that understanding. So are there any questions or comments or thoughts or ideas? Everybody's so quiet. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Adriana. Yeah, hopefully, I think, and these are good pieces to take back to your volunteers as well. To me, that's, our volunteers need to have these understandings. Okay, well, if there's nothing else, then I will let everybody go. And Rebecca, I will call you back in just a couple minutes. I need to go get a drink of water, and then I will call you back. And then I will try to get session 1 and this session out this afternoon, so that way everybody's got it. So, and then next week, let me look at my schedule. Next week we are on Wednesday from 10 to 11:30. So, and we may only go till 11. I may have to cut that one down because I have to then run over to campus and judge an FFA contest and then fly to Vegas. So it'll be a very busy day. So thanks everybody, and have a great rest of the week.